Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you wherever you are logging in from. We want to thank you for attending the first of several speakers who will be presenting this week to celebrate Black History Month in our Black History Month speaker series. And so we are 4 speakers in, and so we're excited for this first year of being able to do this. Before I introduce our guest to you, let me introduce myself. My name is Reverend Charlotta Green. I am one of the graduate assistants here at the Graduate School of Education and Psychology at Pepperdine University and our Center for Global Partnerships and Learning. The center provides GSCP students with a myriad of services ranging from publication support, certificate programs, access GSCP's academic journal, and a few other services. We're always here to kind of assist you. It is through the center that we bring you our programming to celebrate this Black History Month and the speaker series. With that being said, I'm going to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Donta Morrison. Dr. Morrison is a Pepperdine alum with the Graduate School of Education and Psychology with the Doctorate of Philosophy and Global Leadership and Change. He is a Los Angeles-based community change agent focused on bridging gaps that will improve the lives of marginalized individuals, specifically Black, gay, and bisexual men. His research focused on the impact of faith-based sexual exclusion upon the lives of Black Christian men who have sex with men who are actively involved within the traditional Black church. Dr. Morrison is a veteran of the United States Air Force, member of Kappa Lambda Chi military fraternity, Incorporated, and the host of the highly engaging The Donta Show on YouTube. We are excited to hear from our speaker tonight, and the next voice you will hear is Dr. Donta Morrison. We thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Charlotta. I appreciate it. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me here on this morning for some of you, this evening for others. I appreciate this opportunity to just share a little bit about Black history, as well as my experience as a Black scholar growing up in the educational system here in the States. And I'm excited to be talking to the New Delhi Institute of Management. This is awesome. I was actually there on your campus in 2019. I believe it was June or July of 2019, I came with my cohort with Dr. Williams, and we had a phenomenal visit. We presented our dissertation topics, and I met so many of you, and it was great to be in New Delhi. So just to have this opportunity to re-engage with you all is phenomenal. I didn't think it would happen again. And for those who are not in India, but are watching stateside, thank you so much for just taking time out to be a part of this conversation. So as stated, I'm a recent graduate of the PhD program. I finished my dissertation and defended it in May of 2021. And currently I am the Associate Director of HIV Prevention Services at APLA Health, which is an HIV/AIDS service organization housed in Los Angeles, California. Basically, we provide services to people living with HIV as far as housing and food and whatever challenges they may have. So we help navigate them through that experience, as well as provide other sexual health clinical services to those at risk for HIV infection. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get started because I don't want to keep you waiting. I don't want to hold up the time. So let me open up my screen and share my presentation. Hopefully you all can see it. So Black history, things I learned along the way. And what I'm really gonna talk about is just my experience going through the school system as a Black person, talk about some of the things that I felt were missed from my primary and secondary education that really would have benefited me and changed how I viewed myself as an African American. Also how those changes affect my community as a whole and influences white behaviors within America. And I think it's important that Black history not only be talked about in the month of February, but being an ongoing part of the curriculum scope of work. So table of contents, Black History Month. I'm just gonna do a brief overview of the origins. Where did it come from? Why do we celebrate it? Who started it? And how do we get to a whole month? I'm gonna discuss disconnects in education, some adverse outcomes, and then potential next steps. So let's start with the origin. And before it was Black History Month, it was actually called Negro History Week. So although many Blacks complain about why do we get the shortest month of the year to celebrate Black history, we really only had 7 days. And I know the Bible says be thankful over a few things, So as we are evolving and advancing, we went from Negro History Week to Black History Month. How do we get here? And I love showing pictures of these archived images of African Americans or Negroes or colored persons. I like looking at it because when I see these images, I look in their eyes. And as you just look deep into it, it's like, what were they thinking right before the camera flashed? What was in their mind? What was going through their thought process? It was like, do they feel worthy? Do they feel relevant? Do they feel a part of this American system? Did they feel like they had already arrived? I look at this father and daughter, and the father is in a military uniform, off to war, fighting for a country that really does not even see him as a whole person, holding his daughter that he believes, will be the future miss, whatever that miss may be, because of his efforts, because of his valiant energy, because of what he is pouring into this nation. Is that going to open doors for his child? I look at these young country people, as we will call them, and how there is laughter and smiles on the children's faces. Do they know that they are part of a marginalized community? Do they know that the color of their skin is going to be a deterrent to so many different possibilities within America? Is the grandmother protecting them from those things, or is she just praying to God that her babies will have equal opportunity one day? I look at these scholars, these educators sitting there, regal, ready to learn, ready to pour, ready to give back, ready to show their worth, ready to just share their inventions, share their thoughts, share their change ideas and their change concepts. I love looking at my ancestors because I know they paved the way for me to become Dr. Donta Morrison. So Negro History Week, where did it start? So Carter G. Woodson, he was a writer and a historian, and he was he was a pivotal component to just Black history, pivotal piece in just learning more about us as a people. Like you see here, it says he was the father of Black history, and he believed that we should all be proud of our heritage. But as we go through this presentation, how can Blacks be proud of a heritage that they know nothing about? How can Black people hold their head high when they don't even know why they're holding their head high? How can Black people celebrate and applaud all they've overcome when they're not being told all they've overcome from a realistic and honest way? How do they do that? How do we do that? But he believed that we should have a week, a time to look back and celebrate the achievements of all that we've contributed, the achievements of all that we have done. And because of his influence, Negro History Week was birthed in February 7, 1926. Now, the reason he chose February because it taught two great Americans played a prominent role in Black history. Abraham Lincoln, who emancipated the slaves, and Frederick Douglass. So those two individuals are the reason why February was chosen for Negro History Week and evidently Black History Month. How do we get to Black History Month? Well, in 1976, President Gerald Ford realized that we should have more than just 7 days. We should have more than a week because our contributions are far too great to be funneled down into just that small time frame. So Black History Month is a time to honor the contributions and legacy of African Americans across US history and society. It is a time for us to stop, pause, and reflect about all that we have done to make America great. So here we go, Black History Month. And with this, I'm going to dive into just some challenges that I saw growing up in the education system in America as it pertains to my culture, my heritage, and my knowledge of self. So let's dive into the disconnects in education. We're going to talk about who is teaching, what is taught, and what is not taught. And these are all from my personal experiences. This is things that I have witnessed along the way, things that I think would have really helped me to elevate as an individual a lot faster. I would not be walking around wondering, well, what's going on? Where did this come from? And why am I not allowed? I would have a clear understanding of the obstacles and what needs to be overcome. Little data here. Who is teaching? According to a 2018-19 Pew Research study, 47% of all public elementary and secondary school students in the US were white. That's 47%. That's almost half of public school students in the US were white. Now, when you think about that, now we can't say that the other 53% was Black. No, the other 53% consisted of young kids of color. So that's Black, Latino, Asian American, Asian Pacific Islander. It's this whole melting pot, of students alongside the majority, which were white. So depending on where you lived, where you were brought up, where you were raised, will really much determine what kind of education you got. Were you sitting in a room filled with your peers and those that looked like you? Or were you a minority, overshadowed by the majority that was in this space that was normally taught by someone that did not look like you? Roughly 8 in 10 US public school teachers identified as non-Hispanic white. So we have people that do not look like us teaching us about our history. Now, if you come from an environment where you're already dealing with the systemic oppressions associated with racism, and then you get into a classroom and you're being taught by someone that looks like that same individual that racially profiles you out on the streets, how does that do your trust? How does that help you learn? If your teacher looks like the person that you see on the news as killing African Americans, or as having all these discouraging remarks about people of color, it makes you kind of be guarded when you walk into that classroom. Here's a chart that I found that talked about diversity in the classroom. Now, if we look at the teachers, that all blue represents white, 81.9%. And then as you see, the percentage drops for 2 races, Asian Pacific Islander, Black, and Hispanic. Now look at the students. 51% of the students are white. And then as you can see, the percentage of other races is smaller. So that is a simplistic way to see that white teachers outnumber by far minority students. So students are not afforded opportunities to learn from their own. And this is not just Black students with Black teachers. Think about Latina students that need a Latina teacher. Think about an Asian Pacific Islander student that would love to have an Asian Pacific Islander teacher. Think about an Indian student that would love to have an Indian teacher. Someone they can relate to, someone that can relate to them, relate to their culture, relate to their upbringing, relate to their understanding, relate to how they navigate life, relate to their pressures, relate to how it feels to exist as a minority in America. All of that plays a part in how effective the teaching can be. So who is teaching Black students? And I love this picture because the little girl was looking at the teacher like, girl, what are you talking about? I don't believe you. If you look in her eyes, it's like, should I trust what you're saying to me? Because you look like the oppressor. And I'm not trying to be mean in saying that, but we have to understand what our children are seeing, especially thanks to social media, especially thanks to the news outlets that just share everything. Our young kids are exposed to so much, and they're so much further in life when it comes to knowledge than many of us were, because we were not privy to a lot of things they have access to. So we can see a disconnect in this image between student and teacher. Now, the teacher may have a good heart. The teacher may be good-natured and good-intended as she teaches this student, but the student is already on the defense because of what they are dealing with outside of the classroom. So disconnects in education. This quote I found says, textbook and curriculum standards that sanitize, oversimplify, or misrepresent the hard history of slavery and civil rights struggles are a big part of the problem. But so are unprepared teachers and the instructors that support them. So underprepared teachers. And I want to be clear, I am not bashing teachers. I am not bashing, people that go into the teaching vocation. I'm not bashing that at all. But when we talk about Black history, there has to be a connection, there has to be a passion, there has to be a concern about ensuring that Black students are well informed about their history, so that they can better prepare themselves to exist in a country that oftentimes overlooks their contributions. So if teachers are underprepared to teach about the ramifications of slavery, about what the slaves endured as they crossed the Atlantic, about why they were even enslaved. You know, all of that is important for a child to know. If they want to have the historical context of all of this, we cannot water down what occurred back within their lineage. So what is taught? So this is my experience, and this may be a bit comical for some, but this was my experience. A safe and watered down version of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, I will tell you, it was not until I reached college level that I truly understand what happened during the transatlantic slave trade. Now, fortunately, when I was younger, my grandmother gave me Roots to read. And by younger, I mean 7th grade. So I read Roots in the 7th grade. If anybody's ever heard of Roots, it is a book by Alex Haley that is very comprehensive and very explicit in detail about what the African went through on the way to America and their life in this new land. Now, it was explicit, but a lot of young people are not privy to that. So they're told basically that the transatlantic slave trade was when Blacks were put onto a slave ship and just cruised across the Atlantic to the New World. It was not a Royal Caribbean. It was not Carnival. You know, it was not Norwegian. It was not Princess Cruise Lines. You know, slave ships were volatile. They were hostile. They were deadly. They were unfair, they were unsafe, they were unsanitary. But those brutish experiences are not taught. I'm not sure if it's because we feel that young kids cannot understand that. However, it is only fair that they get a clear understanding of what their ancestors endured on the way to America. It is only fair that they have a clear and concise picture and image of what slaves endured en route during that middle passage, where many died. Many died along the way. They did not even make it to the New World. They were ripped from their families, ripped from their homes, ripped from their cultures. We water it down because either we don't want to scare them or we don't want to empower them. Inoffensive messaging and false narratives about American slavery that discourage ideas about the brutality and violence that occurred. Now, in the Black community, Black children get whippings. You know, if we're punished or if we're do something wrong, we'll get whippings. We'll be told to go outside and get a switch. You know, get a switch and you bring that switch back in here and I'm gonna tear your tail up. You know, I'm gonna whip you really good because you don't behave that way. Where did that behavior come from? What's the root of it? Why does that happen even to this day? You know, and I think teaching our kids about what happened on the plantation, we were whipped, we were beaten, we were bruised if we did not adhere to the commands of our master and overseer. And unfortunately, those same acts of discipline are in Black households. And those same behaviors we see passed down from grandparent to parent to child, and the behavior is normalized. It is unfortunate and it is sad, but it stems from our life on the plantation. We have to be honest and not water down what happened to the Black American on the plantation, not water down what happened to the African once they landed on American soil. The ones that did not want to lose their native tongues, the ones that did not want to change their names, the ones that did not want to obey to everything that the white master had to say. They should be taught that. It is empowering for kids to know what their ancestors endured and overcame, and that we did not just cease to exist. Black history did not just begin in America. It has to go back to Africa from whence we came. It is important to do so. And then conservative explanations about racism that dispel white American accountability. We cannot water down the fact that slavery was rooted in racism. The capturing of slaves in Africa, the enslavement of Africans was rooted in racism. And there's also no knowledge or understanding that young people get as to why African slaves were chosen. Why were Africans chosen? Why were Africans enslaved? Why were Africans brought to America? To understand that. Because if they were to truly understand why Africans were chosen, they would see that there is something about them that makes them better than their oppressor. Because the oppressor saw something in the African that was beyond their understanding, that was beyond them. So we must enslave them. We must bring them here to show them who is boss. We have to break them down to let them feel inferior to us, because prior to that, they did not. And our young Black kids need to know that you are not inferior to anyone. Hold your head high. You are on the same level, if not above. It is important that we instill that in their mindset. And what is not taught? The vast contributions of Black Americans, both slave and free, that furthered the growth, power, and influence of America. There is so much that has occurred in America that our young kids do not know that Blacks even had a part of it. They don't know that a Black man invented the ice cream scooper. They don't know that. They don't know that a Black man invented the stoplight, that red, green, and yellow. They don't know that. It's so much that they are unaware of. So they can't have pride in their heritage. They can't have pride in their legacy. They can't have pride. They don't understand why they have these ideas to invent. Why are they so prone to science and this? They don't understand that. It's a part of their DNA. It's in their bloodline. The only thing that I was taught growing up about Blacks was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Those were the two. And of course, Harriet Tubman. I was taught the generics, the brand names for Black history. I was taught about them, but I was not taught about the other powerful leaders that influenced a lot of America, that influenced a lot of what's going on, a lot of what we're doing. It's important that they know. We're not taught the impact of white supremacy and how it still guides American behavior and policy making. As we have witnessed, most recently last year, white supremacy plays a prominent role in American decision making. The voice of the Black man is not at the top. The voice of the Black man is not often heard. White supremacy still guides the behaviors of a lot of Americans, and it was more prominent within a certain presidency than ever before. And I think many of us witnessed what occurred during those tumultuous years when it seemed like white supremacy had reared its ugly head to a whole new level. And Blacks in America had to deal with that. But Black youth were not taught where that came from. They were not taught to understand why it was still present. They were not taught the historical lessons that need to prepare them for what was occurring within that time span. There are adverse outcomes to not teaching Black history, adverse outcomes for Black Americans and adverse outcomes for white Americans. We have to learn that Black history is our history. It is a part of American history. Teaching about Black contributions, teaching about slavery from an honest perspective is all about reshaping America. We talk about unity. We talk about making America great again. We cannot unify unless we're honest and transparent. We cannot unify or make this country great again if we do not get real about what happened before. How did we get here? So Black America is fatigued by the constant battle for equity and equality. Like I said, most recently during the George Floyd era of civil unrest, we saw just a frustration in Black America. Here we are again. And the stories constantly seem to repeat themselves. It's an echo that just keeps going on and on and on and on. There has been no change. No change to the system. Like I said, the white supremacist system, there's been no change. There's a constant battle for equity and equality. Blacks do not feel equal. Blacks do not feel equitable in America. Blacks still feel as though we are fighting to get a seat at the table. And although there have been, advancements in our voice, we're still not level with our white counterparts. Black America struggles with self-identification, Black versus African-American. I posted this on my Facebook page one time. I said, hey, do you identify as Black or African-American? And it was an endless chatter of confusion. People don't know that. I don't know what to land on. It's like, I'm Black, but I don't want to erase out my African experience. I don't want to erase the fact that I come from Africa. I'm African-American. However, we've never been to Africa. We don't have African paperwork. There's no documentation for us in Africa. So do we settle on Black, which would overshadow the African part of us? Or do we just deny the African part and just say we're American? Why can't we just be American? Why is there white American? Why is there Black American? Why is there Latino American? Why is there Asian American? Why can't we just be American? Is there a reason why we have to hyphenate American? If anyone can explain that, let me know and I'll add it to my presentation. But I'm trying to figure that out as well. You know, and I ask those who are watching, if you are Black and you're watching, are you Black or are you African American? Don't be scared. Feel free to comment in the chat. What do you identify as? Because until we're able to have healthy discourse about that and to unpack that and say, you know what, Dante, I never thought about that. I'm not sure. You know, and I check Black on the box. I check African American on the box, but it's like, what is really going on? How do you identify? How do you identify? And why do you identify that way? What encouraged you to identify that way? And then, where we at? Okay, here we go. Angered by how their contributions are overlooked and unappreciated. This goes back to all of our contributions that we've made throughout, from setting foot on this country to present day. Those contributions, those inventions, the money, you know, the backbreaking labor that we've contributed to making this country great is oftentimes overlooked. It's oftentimes belittled, and it's oftentimes forgotten about. It's not taught in classrooms early on. Like I said, I learned a majority of my Black history once I got to college, and much of that I had to research on my own. It was not accessible. We have books that the kids are not allowed to read because it may influence their decision making. It's a book. It's really all about how it is taught. You know, how is it presented to a student? I even saw a few books on certain lists that I read when I was in junior high school that the teachers gave to me that are now on these banned book lists. I don't understand the banning of books. If it's going to educate, if there are teachable moments, let our children learn. Let them learn their history. Regardless of race, everyone should learn about Black history. We're forced to learn about white history and white America, but it is not evened out. It is not even out. So I think it's really about just understanding our heritage, paying homage to our heritage, and allowing our heritage to be present in these conversations so that Black kids, when they walk into a space, they can walk in with their head held high. They can walk in and know that their ancestors were contributors to this country. They are respected, they are acknowledged, and they are affirmed. That needs to happen. That needs to occur ASAP. White America. Now, this can be triggering for some, but this is what Black people are experiencing because of how Black history is not taught. White America has a false sense of superiority influenced by unbalanced historical teachings. There is nothing within our educational system at a young age that allows white children to learn about the true concept of slavery and what their white ancestors did. Many white people that I have met and had conversations with about slavery and whatnot, they were not told the truth. Well, they were told a truth, but they were not told the whole truth. And a lot of them had no idea that so much trauma occurred on plantations, that so much trauma occurred during the Middle Passage. They're not aware of that. They're not aware. And they sit back and they watch their families operate from a space of elitism when it comes to other races and think that is the normal, not realizing that they are adding to the oppressive system that is America. Because historically, it is not taught. So white Americans, young white children, are not knowledgeable. So they don't understand why their Black peers in class are so frustrated. They don't understand why there is so much anger and vitriol on TV screens when an injustice happens to a Black person. They don't get it. They're like, why are they still complaining? Aren't they free? They're not slaves anymore. You know, so why are they still mad? Why are they rioting? Why are they fighting? You know, they don't understand that systemically, this has been going on since we stepped foot on American soil. Oppression, oppression, oppression at the hands of white people. They don't understand that. So they don't get the anger. And even in my doctoral class, we had conversations about race because like I said, we went through it during the George Floyd season and we had conversations about that. And my white counterparts, they were like, we don't get it. We really do not understand. And for the Blacks, we're like, how do you not understand that we have been oppressed for centuries? How do you not understand that we have been marginalized for centuries? How do you live in America and not fully understand what Blacks are going through? Because Black history is not taught. It is not taught in a manner that will level the playing field and put us all on the road towards equality and equity. They exist in a monolith as it pertains to the political, corporate, and social structure of American society. It's conditioning, it's social conditioning. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that is what Blacks see. So white America, because Black history is not taught to them, at a young age, they grow up like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. My life is good. My life is great. All is well on my end. I have privilege, I have access, I have this, I have that. Everything that I have, you can get it too, Black person. Just try harder. Just try harder, because they exist in a system that was created and designed for them, because they have no knowledge about the Black presence and how that oppression feels. And then lastly, still struggles to see Black Americans as vital contributors to society. And if you think I'm lying, I'm gonna show you something that happened so yesterday. How about this? Here you go. If you saw this, Mitch McConnell said, Black people vote just as much as Americans. How in the world did he separate the two? He said, Black people vote just as much as Americans. Yes, Regina, I clutched my pearls as well. I could not believe it. I was like, did he really just say that? He said that. And I believe he said it with good intention. And I believe he said it as to say, see, Black people vote just as much as Americans. They're not Americans. They're people. I see them as people. I recognize them as people. And they vote just as much as good old Americans. And I think that is that conditioning that is constant in America. That is what's going on that we see in America. And that right there was triggering on so many fronts. Black people were like, wow, they still don't see us as equal. They still don't see us as a part of this country. Wow, that's saddening. So next steps. So healing and retribution, that's across the board. There needs to be healing within white America, retribution within Black America. A lot of stuff needs to happen to build these bridges and pull us all together. First thing, a reckoning with racism starts with learning and accepting the undistorted truth and toll of slavery and current white supremacist influences. We can no longer deny the presence of racism. We can no longer try to water it down. We can no longer say it's not that bad. We can't even say things are improving, because they're not. It's the same situation, just written differently. It's the same exact situation, the same kind of oppression, the same kind of violence, the same kind of, just judicial system. Everything is the same, it's just written differently. Until we start doing the work of deconstructing the system. And that's gonna take looking at our history, looking at the history of America, looking at how America has thrived, throughout centuries on the backs of Black Americans. Look at all of that and recognize that racism is a problem in America. Look at the fact that white supremacist influence is still present. My dissertation talked about white supremacist influences within the Black church. And one would think that the Black church is an institution built for and designed by Black people. However, in the process of creating the Black church, there was still white supremacist influence present because of how white people approach Christianity. So when you look at it from that lens, it's like, regardless of what is being built in America, there is always going to be a white supremacist influence, because white people have set a bar that a lot of minorities try to reach. And it's like, if I don't get white acceptance, if I don't get white validation, then what I'm doing does not matter. That should not be the truth. But that is only factual right now because Black history is not effectively taught within our classrooms. No other history is effectively taught within our classrooms. It is all a white history. It's white history, his story, white approach, white lens, white resolve, white creation. The Black voice is omitted in standardized curriculums. Incorporate comprehensive education on Black history into primary and secondary school curriculums. Now, I know that it can be a bit much for a 7 or 8-year-old to see a Black person being hung from a tree, or to see a Black person being brutally whipped. I know that is a lot for a child. That is way too much for a child to see. But there has to be a way to introduce slavery at an early age. There has to be a way to introduce what happened during the transatlantic slave trade. There has to be a way to introduce how Africans were enslaved and brought to America at an early age, because that will help them grow into the truth about who they are. That will help them build an understanding about who they are. That will help them begin to hone in, on the strengths they have as Black people, the resilience they have as Black people. That will help them hold their head high and stick their chest out and say, wow, yeah, I'm Black. I'm not ashamed. I'm not embarrassed. I'm not inferior to you, especially if they're in classrooms where they are the minority, being taught by the majority. It is important to incorporate these curriculums, to incorporate this education into their learning system. And then promote the importance of critical race theory. Uh-oh, that's a curse word for a lot of people, but that was the base of my dissertation, critical race theory. Promote the importance of it and how it can prompt conversations that heal and bring understanding. It is all about people not being afraid to have these hard talks. We have to get to that place. And I love having scholarly conversations because we're able to unpack and dissect in a very healthy fashion. We have to do that so that our kids will have a chance to really learn about American history, so that they can begin to build a new America that is truly inclusive of all. We say it in all of our decrees, one nation under God. But how does that one nation look? Is that one nation white? Or is that one nation a beautiful melting pot of color? A beautiful melting pot of different ideas, different cultures that are equally respected and equally supported. It is important that we have these talks so that we can begin to dig up the root of white supremacy, take those notions and those teachings out of our classrooms, because right now they're still there in a very covert fashion. It's very covert. It's very subtle, to make other ethnicities feel like unless you are white in America, you have to fight harder. You have to go through more. You have to deal with this. And minorities should not be born fighting. We should all be born equal. We should all be born balanced. We should all be born into equitable spaces. That has to happen. And then most important, Black students need Black teachers. There is a level of connectedness that creates an unspoken desire and willingness to succeed. That Black teacher will look at that Black student and can relate to what that child may be going through, can relate to how their home may be dealing with certain situations, can relate to how that child may be like, man, I've been told my whole life that my skin color, is a detriment to my success. That Black teacher can empathize with that student and really talk to that student in a way that the student is going to receive and understand. Because the student knows that that teacher that looks like my grandma or my mom or my dad or my uncle really has my best interest at heart. It is so important that children are taught by people that look like them. And then, let me go back to this real quick. So the Black students need Black teachers. Even in my college life, even at Pepperdine, and I did 2 degrees at Pepperdine, my master's and my doctorate. And throughout the course of all my learning at Pepperdine, I only had 5 Black instructors. Only had 5. And that was something that I addressed constantly. I'm like, can I get some more Black instructors? Because I feel like I want to have someone pouring into me that looks like me. They can really understand what I have been dealing with my whole life as a Black man in America. Someone that can just kind of tap into the space that I'm in. But the majority of my teachers at Pepperdine, love Pepperdine, but the majority of them were white. Great teachers, but I did not see myself. So of course, in the master's program, when I was encouraged to go and get my PhD, I was like, well, I don't really know a lot of Black doctors because I'm not seeing a lot of Black doctors educate me. And that played a huge part. So when I got to the PhD program, I really only had 2 professors in the PhD program that were African American, that taught me directly, you know. And I think that speaks volumes to how we need more people of color to enter into the educational field. And then lastly, this quote: the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. And as long as we are omitting comprehensive Black history from primary and secondary education, our young people will think they are powerless in America. They will think they don't have a voice. They will think their contributions don't matter. They will think their ancestors were nothing but mere slaves. They won't know that we had educators, we had inventors, we had scholars, we had politicians, we had so many firsts in America. I mean, and I'm talking about first ever in America were Blacks. They won't know that. So if they don't know that, they're going to constantly enter into spaces feeling inferior, feeling like they don't belong when they do, because their ancestors have already been there. So it is important that we incorporate Black history into our teaching, because growing up, I did not have comprehensive Black history education. Much of it I had to seek out on my own. Much of it I had to learn on a college level. And even a lot of that was watered down. So it is important and it is crucial if we're going to really create shifts in America and make America great. I'm not going to say again, because how it was great before wasn't conducive to people of color. So to make America great, we have to make sure that we're inclusive in our education so that every single child in the classroom can feel heard, they can feel represented, and they can see themselves in the teachings that they're getting. And that is it for me. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Dante. We do have a couple of questions. I've been looking at the chat. So we have one question here. Do you think it's appropriate? Oh, let's see. So what are the implications of this for undergraduate students who are not taught these important points? For instance, what can be done to support students who may only have 4 years of official education left? So that's one of the questions. And then you can answer that one, but we also have an identity question.
Okay. So, all right. So what was it? What are the implications?
Yeah. So let me, and Kaylee, feel free to jump in since this is your question. I think, you know, when you're talking about like formalized education, when you get students who come to college who've not really been introduced to a comprehensive history that is inclusive of Black history,
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're going to play catch up. How do you do that? I mean, because they've already been etched and formed. So what are some of the ways, what are the implications of really doing that kind of hard work
Right.
with the students?
It's interesting. Basically, how do you break a belief system? You know, because oftentimes when someone enters college, especially a young person fresh out of high school, they already have a belief system about America or how things are. And then they'll go into these spaces where it's like, okay, great, I'm here. Let's move on to the next phase of my life. But how do you just wow them with all this Black history stuff and say, listen, everything you were taught early on was great, but there's so much more you need to learn about America and American history, you know. And I think that is a very solid question. How do we make it, I don't want to say mandatory, but how do we spark a person's curiosity to realize that they should better understand Black history? Because it's hard to do that when you feel I don't relate to those people. You know, that's not my struggle. That's not my problem. So how does it benefit me? I think what needs to happen is we need to show the benefits of learning Black history, you know, and show how that can help you in the future. I know right now, everyone is big on diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion, that's the new catchphrase. That's the new catch training, you know. But how do you create a diverse atmosphere if people aren't even willing to learn about the historical context in which we all came to be? You know, the only reason we have America, you know, is because of slavery. You know, slavery played such a huge part in building out this country, in building out this nation. It was huge. But white people, I've never heard white people say we owe it all to slavery. You know, now that may be a slap in the face to a lot of Blacks, but it's still an acknowledgement of the backbreaking work that we did to help make America great. So I guess the answer to that would be, we have to start early, sparking interest about people really learning the true history of America. And it's really deconstructing how American history is taught, so that people can see it goes beyond the boat, you know, and really gets into the nooks and crannies. And I think that should happen in high school. It really should happen in high school, because kids nowadays, they're exposed to everything under the sun thanks to the internet. But we still feel the stuff needs to be watered down and they can't handle it. And I teach kids sex education, and I'm telling you, I mean, teaching them now versus teaching them 10 years ago is like night and day because of the exposure level. And a lot of our kids, a lot of our white kids are interested and they want to know. They want to know. But we have created this shield around all youth, like they're just these fragile little elves that can't be just touched because they're going to break. Our kids are a lot tougher nowadays than we give them credit for. And I think they're tired of sheltered teaching. And they're tired of, I don't want to say the lies, but they're tired of all this watered down stuff. They want the meat on the platter.
Yeah, the fairy tales.
Yeah.
Because if we tell the true stories and the true kind of happenings, then, you know, we have to then say George Washington and many of the first founding fathers of the country owned slaves.
Right.
They were instrumental in genocide.
Right.
And they weren't really all those, they become heroes, but were they really heroes? And
right.
So that piece right there. I want to acknowledge we had a hand up, and then there's a question about how ethnic and racial disparities in education impact your life, and how do you overcome that challenge?
I think for me, one thing it did for me, honestly, on a graduate level, it affected my life because it skewed my understanding of how to navigate college. You know, those disparities and all that. I think I didn't grow up thinking that college was for me. You know, in the Black community, you turn 18, you get a job. You do something. School was not something that I felt I can do. And I don't know if that was a Black thing or just my neighborhood and my community, but I went to public school. I grew up in the hood, and college was not something that we were prepared for. We were prepared to go to a trade school, a beauty college, and I went to the military, but to really pursue academia was not something that I was groomed to do. Versus my white counterparts, you know, growing up, you know, they got the college fund and they got this and they got that. Not all, I'm just saying the majority that I knew, they were on this pathway, and if they didn't get into a certain school, they were devastated. I'm like, why y'all crying? What's good? You go get a job, you know? So when I did decide to go back to school, I entered school nervous. I entered school like I'm gonna fail because this is not set up for me. I'm not gonna learn here. What really shifted for me, honestly, was not until I got into a doctorate program and I found myself pursuing a PhD in global leadership while watching civil unrest happen in America. And it was not talked about in any of my classes. You know, it was glazed over. So the Blacks in the class, we're sitting back like, are we ever going to talk about this police that had his knee on the neck of George Floyd? Are we ever going to discuss that? Because we're talking about how to do global fundraising and how to build global all this, but what about what's happening right here in America? Are we ever going to dissect that? That's when I realized that American education, sadly, unless you're taking a class that's really talking about racial and ethnic issues, is just not prepared to just unpack that, because it's so triggering, and it can lead to just a can of worms of conversation. But it wasn't until I got into the PhD program that I said, wow, something needs to change with how we approach education as people of color, because this is hard to do. This is very hard to do. So I overcame it by really recognizing it was a problem. and then doing what I had to do to prepare myself to have conversations like this, to be in uncomfortable spaces with white people that may not see nothing wrong. And I'm like, but there is something wrong. And not to the point where I'm gonna fight and all that, but like, let's really talk about this. There is something wrong. Something's going on that we're not realizing, that lives are being lost as a result of systemic injustice.
So there's a question about how can we develop genuine friendships with people of color without them thinking we are using them to assuage white guilt? It's a wonderful question.
Okay, I'm trying to see. Okay, oh, how can you do friendship without them thinking to assuage you? That's a great question. That's a great question. And I actually had that situation in my cohort because, like I said, going through it during the George Floyd experience, it was like people were, it felt like people were trying to come to my white classmates, were trying to talk to me to say, Sissy, I like you people. And I'm like, no, I know you like me, and I'm not classifying you with racist and all that. I know that, but I think that there is it's such a tiptoe type behavior when it comes to white people befriending Black people in a time of crisis, because they're not sure what our response is going to be. You know, and I spoke on KTLA News the day of George Floyd's funeral, and they had me do commentary. And one of the newscasters, he was white, and he said, Donta, what can white people do right now to help the Black community? And I said, nothing. I said, nothing. You can do absolutely nothing right now. Let us grieve. You know, and I think it's all about that timing. It's like, you know, George Floyd died. We're watching his funeral on TV. I don't want that right now, because my thing was, you should have been doing something to prevent it. You know, we should prepare instead of repair. You know, it's like, where were you at the beginning of all this? Where were you 20 years ago? Where were you 10 years ago? Where were you 5 years ago? Why now, after this man has died, do you want to come in and hold me and pat my back? You can't do nothing right now. Let me grieve. Let me get over the loss of my brother friend. Let me get over the loss of this. And then on the other side of the funeral, after we have buried him and after we kind of exhaled, then you can tap on the door lightly and say, hey, can I come in and sit with you for a minute? Yeah. Yes, sit with me and explain to me why now. Yeah. Why now? Why now? Because I did create some solid friendships in the PhD program with white people that really wanted to learn the why. But I had to ask them, you need to remove everything you think you know about my struggle. Because unless you've talked to me personally, you're never gonna get it. So let's have healthy discourse, and I need you to just remove all your blinders and let me tell you how I feel instead of you telling me how you think I should be feeling.
If I can push on that just a little bit, the other thing that I want to make sure that we highlight is it's important for people to be authentic, right? Be authentic, be honest, and do not assume that it is Black people or brown people or people of color's responsibility to educate you on the brokenness of the system and the mistreatment of white people for Black people. Like that's not the responsibility. And also, don't step into a space where you're not willing to own that when you decide to engage in this kind of dialogue, there's a lot of pain, and are you willing to carry it?
Right. I agree. You said that, Barry, not gonna even say it. That's right.
Well, I wanted to offer that in. We've got a few more minutes, and I really want to, just say thank you. Number one, for sharing your story and being honest and authentic. If I can offer a couple of things from listening to what you said, to our guest.
Real quick, I'm sorry. Real quick, I just want to thank. I think it's Kaylee.
Yes.
Yeah, for that.
The question
about the Christianity, and that's now, Kaylee, listen, my dissertation was about the Black church and Christianity, and I unpacked that bad boy like you would not believe. So you're right on it. I think it's how we pick and choose what our kids can handle. Because I tell you, I saw the Passion of the Christ one time, And that was it. That's all I could take because it was just too violent, too brutal. And I was a good grown man when I saw that. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry,
No,
go ahead,
That,
Charlotte.
I'd like to put in a request that you come back for another talk on that. I think that would be, such a great dialogue and great. I'd love to hear more, but
I
I
would
just know
love
it's
to.
not the time yet. But
yeah.
on behalf
Right.
of the center, I'll put in a request.
I would love to. I would love to. Definitely, definitely.
Donta, there's one more question before we close up. Can you elaborate a little bit on what exactly does the Black Lives Matter movement want? That's a loaded question.
That's an excellent question. Wow. Yeah. Okay, so I can tap into it a little bit. So just to clarify, Black Lives Matter is solely about police injustice against Black people. And oftentimes, many folks will confuse Black Lives Matter and say they're talking about all Black lives. They're not. Black Lives Matter was designed and created to combat police injustice, not to combat all racism. So it was against police injustice against Black people. You'll oftentimes hear when you see somebody has died violently, or even if it's a Black person that killed another Black person, somebody say, "Oh, where's Black Lives Matter when this happened? Where are they when this happened?" That's not their purpose. Black Lives Matter only goes against police systems, justice systems, when it really comes against Black people. What do they want? They want equality. In terms of the judicial system, police justice. So they're really on the front lines pushing back against the racism and the killing of Black men, Black women at the hands of law enforcement. That's what they want. It's a little bit, it's a lot to unpack with Black Lives Matter because I have my personal opinion about Black Lives Matter, but that's what their focus is. Their focus is on police injustice.
And I think it's important for us to own that original intent of movements, once they're outside of the room that they were conceptualized in and put in the public eye, often take on a life of their own and move away from the original intent of those who started something.
Right.
So I think we also have to just name that.
Definitely. Thank you, Regina. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for that writing center. Come on, dissertation help. Regina got me out of here.
We are so excited to do that. So we are at time, and this was just such a rich conversation. So we want to acknowledge that we are barely scratching the surface with this inaugural event of celebrating Black history and inviting speakers and scholars in to kind of share their engagement with Black history. And that I hope that what happens is this is a catalyst for conversations within your own circles, that it invites you to have conversations with new people that you want to, engage with in your circles, but that at every turn, each of the speaker events gives you an opportunity to delve a little bit deeper into what Black history means, how it impacts people's lives, how it can impact your life, and more importantly, how we as scholars can utilize this information in our work, in our scholarship, and in what we're doing every single day. So with that, again, I want to thank you, Dr. Donta Morrison, for your presentation and the richness of the information. We've had lots of really great speakers this weekend, so I am so thankful that you gave your time. And I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Dr. Asia, right now, so that she can tell you about the rest of the speaker events that are coming up.
Thank you so much, Charlotta. Thank you, Dr. Donta, for coming out today and for speaking to all of us and giving us such a great presentation. We really appreciated you being here today and being one of our speakers. Now, with that said, I do have a form that I was supposed to send you, but I'm having some technical issues with the form. So I'm going to be sending out an email to everybody within the next day or two, asking you to fill out the form for your speakers, and let us, give us some feedback for that. With that said, I would like to share my screen for a minute here because we've got another Black History Month Speaker Series event coming up tomorrow, Wednesday, February 9, at 3 o'clock Pacific, 6 o'clock Eastern, I don't know what time it is in India. It might be quite early for all of you over there, I assume. But Black Educators Matter is the topic of the conversation that Dr. Jayani Sai is going to have with us tomorrow, again at 3 o'clock. So we are extremely happy to have Dr. Jayani. Dr. Jayani will be talking about the impact educators have on their students and why having a teacher who is Black or a person of color can make a world of difference for a more positive impact on students and their learning. So we look forward to seeing you for the talk tomorrow. On top of that, we do have next Tuesday, February 15, at 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern, we have Asia Brabieska Hiden, who will be joining us. She will be speaking to us about leadership confidence, how to survive being the first and only. And I'm excited to hear her talk. Not only that, but she's also my namesake because we apparently have the same exact name, which is kind of cool. So with that said, she will be on tomorrow, on Tuesday, February 15. Please sign up for that. And also on the 16th of February, we will have Black Women Leaders Matter, Keys to Success for Black Women Leaders in Higher Education by our very own Dr. LaShonda Johnson. And she will be speaking to us on the strategies, understanding the common barriers, obstacles, and strategies for reaching and maintaining leadership roles as Black and women. Now, with that said, Black History Month is not going to end there. Black History Month is going to continue on. We do have a couple more events upcoming the following week, February 21st, and we're just getting into the confirmations for all of that. And that information will be sent out to all of you soon. So please go into the chat here and sign up if you have not for the remainder speaker series events that we are having. And with that said, you will get an email sent to you in a little bit with the form to fill out. So please give us that feedback. Thank you all so much for coming, and we hope to see you again for our next speaker event tomorrow. And thank you, Charlotte, and thank you, Dr. Dante.
Thank you. Have a good evening, all.